Hello, today I want to talk about and demonstrate a music theory concept that I like to call cosmic symmetry. That's symmetry, not cemetery, but S-Y-M-M-E-T-R-Y. And specifically I want to talk about a term known as the tritone and another term called the tetrachord. Now when you look at the keyboard, you can see that there's a pattern here within the octave of 2 black notes or 2 black keys and then 3 black notes, 3 black keys, and then it repeats in every octave. But within the octave, it doesn't look symmetrical because of these two patterns here. Now, we know that we have a 12-tone system. There's 12 tones in the chromatic scale, and in the major diatonic scale, there's 7 notes. So how can it be symmetrical? Well, I want to show you a term that will explore that, and it's called the tetrachord. Okay, let's start by talking about the term tetrachord. Comes from the ancient Greek, and it's spelled like this: tetrachord. Now you might think it's a chord, but it's actually a series of notes or a scale. And the Greeks defined it as a series of 3 smaller intervals that span the interval of a perfect fourth. And if you're into math, it's a 4-3 frequency proportion. But for modern usage, we're going to just call it a fourth, a perfect fourth. So we're going to use the scale, the C scale, C, D, E, F. That forms a perfect fourth. So from C to F is a perfect fourth. What you have is a whole step, and a half step. So 1 plus 1 plus 1/2 equals perfect fourth. So then we can continue and take the rest of the C scale, the G, A, B, C equals also a perfect fourth. 1, 1, 1/2. The Greeks used it starting with the E. So they used E, F, G, A equals also a perfect fourth. So they started with the half step, and them 2 whole steps. So now we're going to combine these 2 tetrachords. This is tetrachord 1 and 2 to form the C scale from C to C. Okay, now we take the C scale from C to C. And we can see now that we have a lower tetrachord, these 4 notes, and then we have an upper tetrachord. And then we have this bridge or link between the 2. But here we have a perfect fourth, here we have another perfect fourth. So what we have in defining the scale is we have whole step, half step. Then we have this bridge or gap or connection or conjunction, or you could call it a link, which is a whole step. And then the pattern repeats, as in here, 1, 1, and 1/2. So there's 2 perfect fourths here. Now what is this bridge or this gap? Well, it's actually a note there, and it's an F sharp, or it could be looked at as a G flat. So it's a half step up to the F sharp from the F to the F sharp, and then another half step up from the F sharp to the G, so it creates a whole step there. But that particular note, it defines the tritone. What a tritone is an interval, and in this case it's the interval between C and F sharp. So it's an interval of a augmented fourth or diminished fifth, or you could call it a flat 5. So any interval that is a sharp 4 or diminished fifth or flat 5 is called the tritone. Now it has 3 whole tones. 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals flat 5 or sharp 4. So actually in this scale here you have a tritone between the F and the B, because that interval is also a tritone. It's 3 whole steps. So we're going to look at this a little deeper now, a little further with this. Okay, there's one more detail I want to talk about. Let's put the scale down here again. The C major scale. And we know we have a lower tetrachord here, and an upper tetrachord here. Let's label these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1. The 5 chord, in the case of putting the notes above the roots, would be a dominant seventh. It's the only dominant seventh that's in the system of scale tone sevenths. That equals, well, the notes in it are G, B, D, F natural. So you see, remember I said we had a tritone between F and B here? Now you have the B and the F in reverse order, but you have them in this. So you have the tritone here in the G7 chord. And that's an interval that's very unstable. It wants to resolve. So what it does is resolve back to C. Or sometimes it goes to A minor or A flat, but it usually resolves back to C, and that's the 5-1, which is a very important relationship in music. Tension to resolution. We also have the tritone in the B half diminished chord. But I'm going to demonstrate this for you now on the keyboard. Okay, here we go. Remember I talked about cosmic symmetry. Well, here it is. This is a perfect fourth, perfect fourth. So these two tetrachords are symmetrical, and they make up the C scale, the lower tetrachord and the upper tetrachord. You have an interval here of a whole step to a whole step to a half step, then the whole step link, okay, and then you have whole step, half step. Now that link, which is a whole step, has the F sharp on it. So like you could say, that's the first tetrachord. Now we link it with the tritone, and now we do the upper tetrachord. Now this tritone is actually an interval, means the interval between the root and the F sharp here. The C and the F sharp is an augmented fourth or diminished fifth. Now if you invert it, here's the fascinating thing. If you invert a tritone, you get a tritone. And it's the only interval like that other than the octave. If you invert an octave, you get another octave, see? But no other interval is like that. If you invert a fourth, you get a fifth, okay? You invert a fifth, you get a fourth. If you invert a major third, you get a minor sixth. If you invert a minor third, you get a major sixth. If you invert a major second, you get a minor seventh. And if you invert a minor second, you get a major seventh. Okay, now I'm going to show you something interesting about this symmetrical aspect. If we take the octave now and we move chromatically in opposite directions, down from here and up from here, one at a time, where do we end up? Right in the middle, which is the tritone note. So that has something to do with the symmetry. The other idea is that if we do a whole tone scale, right in the middle is that F sharp again. See, because it's 3 up, and if we come down, it's 3 down. Like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 3 whole steps. So if you're mathematical, you can see that there's something going on here more than meets the eye. So now I want to talk about the tetrachords and how they relate to other keys. If we start here, if we come down, now we know in the key of C we have these chords, triads. And in jazz we're going to use sevenths, of course, like this. But we can see that the 5 chord, or the dominant seventh here, that's called the dominant. The 5 chord is the dominant, and it's a dominant seventh. It's the only one that is a dominant seventh. And what we have here now, looking at the chords, is we have a major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, and then diminished. Okay, so the 3 majors are the 4 and the 5. Now what those are, this is the dominant, this is the subdominant, below the dominant, and this is the tonic. Now, how do they relate to the tetrachord concept? Well, if we start with the scale for F, which would be the subdominant, we start down here, and we play the first tetrachord. There's the link, here's the upper tetrachord, Those are the first four notes of the lower part of the C tetrachord. So the F is linked to the C. In fact, the only note that doesn't fit into a C scale is the B flat, which is the accidental. Now if we continue, like up here now, we're going to be into the upper tetrachord of C, which now becomes the lower tetrachord of G, and so on and so on. In other words, the upper tetrachord of G is going to relate to another tonal center. So we can see that the C and the F and the G are all linked by means of this tetrachord idea. In other words, they have all notes in common. In fact, C and F have every note in common except for the accidental. And C and G have every note in common except for that one accidental. And this goes on through the whole system of keys. All the 12 keys have this type of relationship. And we'll look at the cycle of fifths to show you how it works. Okay, here we have my drawing of the circle of fifths, or you can call it the circle of fourths or the cycle of fifths. And it's a perfect system. In other words, if you look at it mathematically, there's 12 tones, like the 12 hours of the day. It relates to a higher order of things, or a more intelligent universe kind of thing, concept. And so what we have here is movement in intervals that go up a fifth. So in other words, from C to G is a perfect fifth. Or go down a perfect fifth, moving in this direction. So from C to F downward is a perfect fifth. If you look at it from the point of view of the keyboard, you'll understand that. But the other way of looking at it is, if we go up a perfect fourth, we end up on F. From C to upwards is a perfect fourth. If we go downwards from C, we're moving to a perfect fourth. So you might have to look at the keyboard. That may be confusing, but that's why the ambiguity of the cycle of fifths or cycle of fourths. It depends on which direction you're moving in. But the other thing to understand is, if we look at these as keys, the 12 keys of the scale, we can look at these as the 12 tones of the chromatic scale. We can look at these as the 12 keys that exist within the system of the perfect number of 12. What we have here is moving in this direction, which is clockwise. We're moving in the direction of the sharp keys. That means that we're moving from the key of C to the key of G. We're adding one sharp. So we're going from the simple to more complex to more complex. From one sharp, two sharps, three sharps, four sharps, all the way up to 6 sharps here, which is the middle. That would be equivalent of 6. Now we have 6 sharps. One more, we can go one more to C sharp. Now we have 7 sharps. That's the most we can have, the 7 steps of the scale. If we move in counterclockwise direction, we're moving into the flat keys. So this is perfectly symmetrical, as I was talking about earlier about the symmetry. In other words, we move from no sharps or flats into one flat, 2 flats, 3 flats, 4 flats. We're moving into keys now. Key of C has no sharps or flats. Key of F has 1 flat. Key of B flat has 2 flats. All the way down here, now we have 6 flats, which is G flat. We can go one more to C flat, which has 7 flats. Now, the important thing to understand about this is how these work in terms of the counterclockwise direction of tension resolution. Now, that's all that music is tension and resolution. It's sort of like day and night, sort of like yin yang. It's a universal truth. So what we have here is, if we take this as being the tonic key, the key we're in is C, we move up this direction. This becomes the 5th step of C in the scale. And if we define it in terms of a chord, it becomes a G7 or G dominant 7th. Now that G7 has the tritone in it that I talked about. That tritone is creating tension that wants to resolve to C. So that's what we need. We need to have tension resolution in order to have music. Otherwise it's floating around in outer space or something. So music as we know it, Western traditional and modern music and so on, relies on this tension resolution principle. Otherwise, it doesn't make that much sense to us. So it always is moving counterclockwise in the cycle in this way. These three tonal centers or chords, as we look at them, which is the 1, the 5, and the 4, are unified in terms of the tetrachord system that I talked about earlier. They overlap each other. And that's extremely fascinating because what we have here is dominant to tonic, and then we have subdominant here. So this is the 1 chord, this is the 5 chord, this is the 4 chord within the key of C. But it's all relating to the key of C, and it means that we can now create hundreds of songs, and hundreds of songs, thousands of songs are based on these three tonal centers, or three keys, or three chords. And particularly blues, which has like a C chord, a C7, and the 4 chord here as an F7, and the G7 as the 5 chord. Hundreds of songs are based on these 3 chords. Now we can go anywhere around the system here, the cycle of fifths, and whatever key we're in, say we're down here in the key of E, it all works perfectly. In other words, the B7 becomes the dominant chord that moves to E, and the A becomes the subdominant, and so on. E7 moves to A, it moves around the system, around the cycle of fifths in dominant sevenths. Now I'm going to demonstrate this, but it's a perfect system. It's based on the number 12, and it works perfectly, and it's symmetrical. And that was my point. Okay, I'm going to take you through the circle of fifths, and I'm going to try to keep it very simple. I'm going to start with the G7, and there's the tritone there. I'm going to move it up to a first inversion, or invert it, so that what I have is a G, an F, and a B, which is root 7, 3. This is, of course, is a minor 7 interval, or you can call it a flatted 7. And then I'm going to move chromatically down by half steps in the right hand. The left hand is going to go down a fifth, up a fourth, down a fifth, up a fourth, which is going around the cycle. Okay? So I'm going in the direction of counterclockwise. G7 wants to resolve to C. C7 wants to resolve to F. So I'm doing it like this. So I'm going G7 now to C7. Now what happens is, this is root 7, 3. When I go to the C7, now it becomes root 3, 7. So it keeps reversing its position, or its inversion. C7, F7, B flat 7, E flat 7, A flat 7. Now I've run out of room, so I got to go back up here again. So that's D flat 7 now, with the 3rd and the 7th being there. Now this is G flat 7, B7, E7, A7, D7, taking me back to G. So there's the whole cycle. G7, C7, F7, B flat 7, E flat 7, A flat 7, D flat 7, G flat 7, B7, E7, A7, D7, G. Okay, so there you have it. Now that's an exercise, and you say, what good is it? Well, the left hand, I'm going to use those positions, those type of chords, in a very smooth way to move from one chord to the next. I can go through the cycle like this in the left hand. And since cyclical movement is very predominant in all of music, and particularly in jazz, this is very handy to have this type of maneuver, particularly like if you're playing a blues and you're using the 3 chords, the C7, the F7, the G7, you can do things like this. See, so I have this. See that? There's all those chords. using those particular voicings with the tritone in here a lot of times, even within standard tunes like Just in Time, I would use it. Yeah, see, so now you're seeing how the cycle of fifths and everything else I talked about, the tetrachords, the tritone, which is part of that chord that we're talking about, how the symmetry in there is a truth, and it's an amazing thing.